My name is Fran McVey, retired Naval Flight Officer, retired as commander, but I've also done some enlisted time. I like to say I've been both an E5 and an O5. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. Always was torn between two goals. I wanted to be a naval officer and I wanted to be an architect, and those were somewhat in conflict. My father was a carpenter, so I grew up with not too much money. My parents were older. My father was almost 40 when I was born. I was an only child. My parents were quite strict with me, but they also gave me a lot of responsibility and a lot of freedom as long as I stepped up to the responsibility. And when it came time to try to get into a Navy program, along with several of my friends, we joined the reserves while we were still in high school, because in those days everybody had to register for the draft when they were 18. I had also tried to get directly into the Naval Academy out of high school, but I only got as high as first alternate, and the guy ahead of me got the spot, so I had to try a different avenue. So then I tried to get into the academy through the reserves. When that didn't work, then I got into a different officer program, in which, while I was going to the University of Arizona, majoring in architecture on a 5-year program, that I would train for 63 days each summer. Well, then disaster struck in the second summer and I got high blood pressure, and they dropped me out of the program, and I could not get back into an officer program for a couple of years. But then all of a sudden the Navy approached me and said, well, would you volunteer to fly as a naval flight officer in Vietnam, and we'll somehow get you to pass the physical. So here I am, supposedly not physically qualified to be aboard ship, but now I'm suddenly physically qualified to fly. Well, I certainly jumped on that opportunity, but they said, you have to graduate next year. And remember, I was on a 5-year architecture program. So in order to graduate in one more year, I would have to switch majors and carry 22 units each semester, when the maximum was normally allowed to be only 16. So that was tough. I did not have much time to party or to sleep or anything else, but I did manage to graduate Dean's List, as a matter of fact, with an interior design degree and an architecture minor. Worked for a developer for the summer, and then started flight training in the fall.
So, would you like to share a story from your past experience, from wars, or from any of your past experience with us?
Let me go just a little farther with how I got to be the mission commander of the P3 crew in Vietnam, and then I'll talk a little bit about that relationship of a crew. Partly to make the point to all of you that grades are important. One day, we didn't even know what day it was going to be. There we are as junior officers in flight training. They took us into a classroom. They said, well, here's all the orders that are available to your class, and they wrote them down on the chalkboard. And then they said, all right, here's your class standing as of today. Top guy in the class, go make your choice, and erase that. And it went right down until those in the bottom of the class didn't get any choice. Most of the guys in the bottom of the class, surprisingly enough, ended up in F-4 Phantoms flying off the carrier. I had high enough grades, just barely, to get my first choice, which was P3 Orions. Even got choice of home base at Moffett Field and VP-50. And to keep my commitment of flying in Vietnam, I chose VP-50 because that was the next squadron that had a full Vietnam deployment only a few months after I would be checking in. Let's talk a little bit about how a crew works. Our crew was very young and very junior and all reservists. I was the mission commander, as only a Lieutenant JG. We had 6 officers and 9 enlisted most of the time, but we were not very rank conscious. It's more a team, and as tactical coordinator, mission commander, you might view me as the quarterback. I try to run the crew from a position of mutual professional respect for everybody's job was very important. All of our lives depended on all of us doing our job. all the time, we could rely on each other to do that. We flew a heck of a lot. We flew 10 and a half to 11 hours a day, 2 days out of 3 or 3 days out of 4. Our job was to intercept troop trawlers coming from Haiphong, bringing troops to the south. So we would fly at about, I'd usually set up the crew at about 1,500 feet off the water, depending on the sea state, so that we could get very good radar coverage, dive down to 200 feet and look at the contact, usually about 110 to 115 contacts a day. And if they were bad guys carrying troops or munitions south, we would then pull up to assume on-scene command and call in a surface ship to destroy the target. So it was quite demanding work, but the crew was very tight, very much cared about each other on duty and off. A P3 crew operates pretty independently. To be the mission commander, the plane commander, is almost like being the commanding officer of a small ship, because you may go somewhere and stay for 1 or 2 nights completely on your own, and you're completely responsible for everything 24 hours a day that your crew does. Interestingly enough, when we were in Vietnam, we had some of the oldest airplanes, and we had the squadron that was the youngest and most junior when you looked at the ranks and ages of the men in it. So a lot of us got a lot more responsibility than we normally would have. And we had a very wise commanding officer, I believe. He said, I have to ask you guys to work 1 or 2 ranks above what you are. For those of you that don't measure up at a higher level, you'll only be graded at the level that would have been expected in a normal squadron. But those of you that do more will be rewarded in your performance reports. And he was good for his word on that. We had 3 people make admiral that were in the squadron when we were young, several 06s, so that really gave us an opportunity to shine that we would not have had in a normal squadron. But it was also a lot of stress, because I didn't know what I was doing. I guarantee you, when I became a mission commander with less than half the flight time that I normally would have had, and I'm very junior in rank. I showed you a photo of my crew. That's not all the crew, some were on duty. The occasion there that we were clowning around in that photo was when we were allowed to put the A back on our airplane, showing that we were fully qualified as a combat air crew. Because when I became the mission commander and the lieutenant commander transferred out that had the crew before me, we went to 0. Therefore, in addition to flying all of our missions, our share of the missions in Vietnam, we had to fly 23 different exercises to re-qualify with me in the seat. And some years later, our commanding officer, our then commanding officer, by then was an admiral, and he told a story at a gathering at Moffett that I was the one that had taken the crew from 0 to Alpha in the shortest time he'd ever heard of, 41 days. I don't tell you this story for me to brag, but to say how good the crew was. Because as I said, I was very green and inexperienced, but the crew really stood behind me and got us through it together to get back to fully qualified in minimum time. And I really appreciated that. And that's one of those kind of things that really builds a bond with the people that you work with. Then we came back, and all of a sudden we got the state-of-the-art airplanes for the time, fully computerized, 9 brand new airplanes brought right from the assembly line at Lockheed. And with that, what do you think happened to the personnel? All of a sudden we get lieutenant commanders coming in that had avoided the war, but now here's a squadron that's done their wartime service and has brand new airplanes, so these guys want to come in and take over the command slots. And sure enough, a lot of guys that had been the lead pilot throughout Vietnam are now bumped down to co-pilot. I was bumped down from mission commander to navigator for a few weeks, And then, if that wasn't bad enough, these two academy-type lieutenant commanders that came on my crew said, "You don't have any respect to the men. They never call you lieutenant. They never call you sir. They only call you TAC, boss. What's that about?" And I just had to shake my head. What don't these guys understand about real respect? The first time the crew stopped calling me lieutenant a year before and called me TAC, I was married at the time, I went home and told my wife, "I've been accepted. The crew has stopped calling me sir or lieutenant. They're calling me by my crew position. They believe I'm capable of being their new tactical coordinator." So a lesson in what's real respect and what's artificial, right? And always watch out for that, I say. The crew was like, I would say, almost every crew. It's a team. Small groups of guys on the ground probably had the same kind of esprit de corps, although in the Vietnam War, guys on the ground, some didn't want to get too close to anybody because they were hurt even more when somebody was lost if they had become close friends. That's something you may hear when you interview some people that were in the ground war. I was very blessed to not have to be in firefights on the ground. We sometimes took incoming in the air and on the base, and even were attacked by sappers regularly trying to blow up our airplanes on the ground. But that's not at all like being in a firefight in the jungle or something. Yes?
Would you say your relationship with your crew helped with your performance?
Oh, absolutely. What helped was them knowing that the officers believed that their job was just as important as ours. Every seat in the airplane has its job to do. Just tell you a little bit how it works. It's very hectic. You have to get your information in the right order. You have to talk in the right order. Everybody knew that I would give direction to the pilot, and I was listening to each of them speak in order what information they had for me around all the enlisted guys, and so that the navigator could write it down in the right order, made it easier for him. And then they're all going to be quiet so I can give direction to the pilot and to them what to do next. And round the whole flight, you just have to be organized and disciplined enough to do that, to make it work. You wanted me to talk a little bit about what I would like to pass on. I would say decide what your values are as soon as you can, whether you learn that from your parents or from religion, or you have to decide to work through it yourself. Decide what you value, believe in that, and stick to it. And you meet someone, see if that's someone that you would want to embrace because they have an alignment with your values. Tell you another story. I was out in the singles world and I met this woman, and she was quite intelligent and good looking and turned out to be wealthy, and she probably kind of flippantly asked me, "Well, what are you looking for in a woman if you really were going to get into a relationship?" And she probably expected me to say something funny or maybe even off color or inappropriate. And I said, "Strength of character." And she was very surprised. She said, "Is that true?" I said, "Yes, that's absolutely true. That's the primary thing I look for in my friends, and that's the primary thing that I look for when I'm hiring someone, strength of character." And that encompasses a lot of things. And as far as implementing some of those things, once I was a senior officer or a senior executive at the city of San Jose, when it came time to do performance reviews, I would have the individual being evaluated bring in what I called the brag sheet. Come in and put down for me what you think you've done well that would warrant you getting promoted, getting a bonus, whatever. And of course, you're going to have to do what the organization needs. Got to perform, get the job done.
Thank you so much for your time.
Certainly.